At the dawn of the 19th century, a renowned explorer named Alexander von Humboldt embarked on a journey through what was then known as New Spain, modern-day Mexico. Between 1803 and 1804, Humboldt traversed diverse terrains, immersing himself in the geography and remnants of ancient civilizations. During his visit to the capital, he encountered a massive stone disk known today as the Sunstone, which had recently been unearthed and placed beside the Mexico City Cathedral. The monolithic artifact, covered in intricate carvings related to solar worship and the cosmological beliefs of the Mexica people, left a lasting impression on Humboldt. Captivated by the region's vast historical and cultural wealth, he documented his observations in several publications. Years later, in 1810, Humboldt published a book titled Views of the Cordilleras and Monuments of the Indigenous Peoples of America, featuring illustrations of indigenous sculptures, including one labeled Bust of an Aztec Priestess. This seemingly minor detail, the use of the word Aztec, became foundational in shaping how the outside world would come to refer to this ancient civilization. Yet, as we'll see, this terminology is rooted more in European interpretation than historical accuracy. The term Aztec was never used by the people of Tenochtitlan or their contemporaries in the Valley of Mexico, nor was it a name employed by the Spanish conquerors. In reality, the people we commonly refer to as Aztecs called themselves Mexica, a name far more representative of their identity and legacy. The word Aztec originates from the mythical land of Aztlan, a place described in ancient legends as the origin of the Mexica before their migration southward. Humboldt, however, used Aztec extensively in his 1822 work Political Essay on the Kingdom of New Spain, and the term gained even more traction after being adopted by American historian William H. Prescott in his globally influential book History of the Conquest of Mexico, 1843. Over time, the label Aztec came to encompass a diverse group of peoples within the Mexica-led empire, regardless of their actual ethnic or political distinctions. This generalization, although practical for European and Anglo-American audiences, particularly because the word Mexica sounds too similar to Mexican in English, ended up oversimplifying the rich cultural complexity of pre-Hispanic Mesoamerica. Nonetheless, even today, the term Aztec is widely used and recognized in scholarly circles and popular discourse alike. Before we dive deeper, it's worth clarifying that the purpose of discussing terminology like Aztec versus Mexica isn't to criticize one or the other. Language evolves with time and usage. Today, historians generally accept the use of Aztec to refer to the multi-ethnic civilization that flourished in central Mesoamerica between 1325 and 1521, marking the foundation of Tenochtitlan and its fall to Hernán Cortés, respectively. Some scholars prefer the terms Mexica Empire or Triple Alliance to better capture the complexity of the political structure, which included the city-states of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. These three formed a powerful coalition that dominated much of the region. Regardless of the term used, when people refer to the Aztecs, the intended meaning is usually clear. They are speaking about the civilization that built Tenochtitlan and ruled much of central Mexico before the Spanish conquest. The word Aztec has even entered modern lexicons as a synonym for Mexican in some contexts. For instance, institutions and landmarks like the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City continue to use the term without confusion, reflecting its widespread acceptance in both scholarly and popular culture. However, if we aim for historical precision, Aztec technically refers to the people of Aztlan, the mythical northern homeland from which the Mexica allegedly originated. This opens up an intriguing question. Did the Aztecs, in the original sense of the term, ever truly exist? This isn't a rhetorical exercise, but an invitation to investigate the roots of the Mexica civilization. Who were the people that founded Tenochtitlan, and where did they come from? According to various chronicles, including the Chronica Mexica, written in Nahuatl around 1598 by Hernando de Alvarado Tesozomoc, a descendant of Moctezuma, the people initially known as Aztecs lived in Aztlan as subordinates to more dominant groups. Their transformation into the Mexica was catalyzed by the divine intervention of Huitzilopochtli, a deity closely associated with the sun. This god instructed them to leave Aztlan and renounce the name Aztec. From that point on, they would be known as Mexica, chosen to seek a new land and fulfill a sacred destiny. According to the text, it was Huitzilopochtli himself who bestowed upon them their new identity, marking not just a change in name, but in purpose and cultural narrative. The transformation from Aztecs to Mexica was not only symbolic, it marked the beginning of a long and arduous migration. Much like the biblical Israelites fleeing Egypt, the Mexica left Aztlan under divine guidance in search of a promised land. The Codex Boturini, also known as the Tira de la Peregrinación, provides a vivid depiction of this journey. According to its illustrations, the Mexica were not alone when they departed. They traveled alongside 8 other social groups, known as Calpulli, each made up of lineages bound by a shared ancestry. However, the god Huitzilopochtli eventually instructed the Mexica to separate from these other groups and continue their pilgrimage independently. Legend holds that Huitzilopochtli revealed a divine sign they were to look for to identify their new homeland, an eagle perched atop a cactus. This narrative was echoed by several sources, including the 16th century historian Cristobal del Castillo, who likely grew up among Nahua speakers. Interestingly, though this symbolic vision of the eagle on a cactus was not consistently present in ancient codices. Some omit the sign entirely, while others depict the Mexica recognizing it only after encountering it, not as a preordained message, but as an interpreted omen. As for the chronology of these events, several codices suggest the Mexica exodus from Aztlan began around 1064 or 1065 CE. If we consider that Tenochtitlan was officially founded in 1325, this would mean the Mexica spent over 2.5 centuries wandering across the region in search of their prophesied settlement. During this extensive migration, they paused periodically, sometimes for just a few years, other times for decades, wherever they found favorable conditions. The Codex Boturini describes them carrying a sacred wooden effigy of Huitzilopochtli as they passed through arid lands, where they encountered hostile entities called Mimicskoa, lunar deities or demons. At their god's command, they offered these beings in sacrifice, earning gifts of warlike tools like bows, arrows, and nets. Their journey led them through places with names like Coatlicamac, Serpent's Maw, and Quextecaycocayan, where the Huastec wept, each site layered with symbolic or mythological meaning. After decades, they reached Tolan, where they remained for 20 years before moving toward Lake Texcoco. There, they roamed the surrounding area, eventually discovering useful resources like the maguey plant, which they learned to ferment into pulque, a milestone in their cultural development. The account of this migration journey found in the Codex Boturini closely mirrors that of another pictographic manuscript, the Codex Obin, also known as the Codex Tonalamatl, compiled in 1576. In particular, page 14 of the Codex Obin portrays the legendary stop at Cohuatitlan, the place of snakes, symbolized by the head of a serpent. The Codex Boturini, now housed in Mexico City's National Museum of Anthropology and History, remains unfinished. Its narrative abruptly ends with the Mexica reaching Chapultepec, where they are captured by the ruler Tlatoani of Colhuacan. Rather than executing them, the Tlatoani recruits them as mercenaries in a conflict against the Xochimilca people. However, a cultural misunderstanding ensues when he commands the Mexica to mutilate the ears of their enemies as trophies. Instead, they cut off their enemies' noses, a mistake that provokes resentment and ultimately leads to their expulsion. Though this codex cuts off here, the foundational myth of Tenochtitlan continues in other sources like the Codex Mendoza, created under the order of Antonio de Mendoza, the first viceroy of New Spain, in order to inform the Spanish crown about the social, political, and historical makeup of the conquered lands. The Codex Mendoza, also called the Codex Mendocino, begins with a depiction of the founding of Tenochtitlan and the famous sign from Huitzilopochtli, the eagle perched on a cactus, confirming divine approval of the chosen land. In the illustration, several Mexica figures sit on woven mats, observing the miraculous vision. One of them is Tenoch, the last Cuauhtlatoani, a title for leaders during the Mexica migration, whose legacy would be immortalized in the eventual renaming of the city. Archaeological and historical evidence suggests that Tenochtitlan was founded on an island in Lake Texcoco, close to its western shore, though romanticized accounts often credit the sight of the eagle on the cactus as the reason for selecting this location. Excavations reveal that human settlements already existed on that island prior to the 14th century. Initially, the Mexica called their new city Cuauhmixtitlan, meaning place of the eagle among the clouds. But around 1376, Acamapichtli, considered the first Huitzilopochtli, or great ruler, chose to rename it Tenochtitlan in honor of Tenoch, solidifying both the mythological and historical roots of the city as central to the Mexica identity. To the north of the island that became Tenochtitlan, a sister city emerged, Tlatelolco. Whether it was founded before or after Tenochtitlan remains uncertain, but both cities were closely linked in origin and identity. The Nahua inhabitants of both referred to themselves using the term Mexica, sharing language, customs, and ancestry. Over time, this term evolved into Mexicas, which later inspired the Spanish term Mexicanos. Neighboring Nahua groups like the Texcocanos and Tepanecas also spoke Nahuatl and shared similar traditions, yet they identified differently as Acolua and Tepaneca, respectively, marking a clear distinction from the Mexica. Despite these distinctions, many foreign historians, particularly those outside Mexico, grouped all these peoples under the umbrella term Aztecs, a simplification driven by linguistic convenience and the influence of early colonial narratives. However, as clarified earlier, Aztecs originally referred to those from Aztlan, and the Mexica had long ceased using that identity by the time they settled in the Valley of Mexico. The use of the term today often disregards these subtleties, though understanding the distinctions allows for a deeper appreciation of Mesoamerican cultural diversity. Much of what we know about the founding of Tenochtitlan and the Mexica's mythic past comes from codices produced after the Spanish conquest. Only one pre-Hispanic artifact seems to visually corroborate this myth. The Teocalli of the Sacred War, a monolithic stone altar named by renowned archaeologist Alfonso Caso nearly a century ago. Caso interpreted the carvings on the temple-shaped monolith as symbolic of Tenochtitlan's divine founding. The lower section features wavy patterns representing a lake from which a cactus grows, crowned by an eagle. But this depiction raises questions. Some experts believe the reclining figure beneath the cactus is the legendary Prince Copil, said to have betrayed his uncle, Huitzilopochtli. In punishment, the god tore out Copil's heart and cast it into the lake from which the sacred cactus later sprouted. In this interpretation, the plant emerges from Copil's mouth. Others argue that the figure stretches across the full width of the stone, with the cactus growing from its chest. Art historian Barbara Mundy, for instance, suggests it may represent Chalcutlicue, goddess of lakes and rivers, lying defeated. The true identity and symbolism remain debated, reflecting the rich layering of myth, metaphor, and national identity encoded in this ancient artifact. Another focal point in the foundation myth is the eagle itself, specifically what it holds in its beak. Today's Mexican national emblem famously features an eagle devouring a snake atop a cactus, but historical and archaeological records tell a different story. In pre-Hispanic codices and early colonial illustrations, the eagle is rarely, if ever, shown with a snake. In fact, in the earliest representations like those found in the Codex Mendoza, the eagle appears alone, or sometimes devouring a bird. The first known depiction of an eagle holding a snake appears in the Codex Duran, created in 1581 by the Dominican friar Diego Duran. Interestingly, another drawing in that same manuscript shows the eagle eating a bird instead. The concept of the eagle and the snake was further popularized in 1606, when a printed version appeared in Repertorio de los Tiempos, authored by Enrico Martinez. This version spread widely through books and publications in the following centuries, eventually crystallizing into the national image we know today. Yet, there's a twist. Martinez's illustration doesn't depict an eagle at all, but a heron. Despite this inconsistency, the image became iconic, merging mythology, misinterpretation, and political symbolism into a powerful national symbol. Symbolism aside, it's important to understand that what the eagle originally held, according to some indigenous depictions, was not a snake, but a Teotihuacan or Atlachinoli, a Nahua symbol combining the opposing elements of water, ATL, and fire, Tlachinoli, to represent war. This powerful concept often appeared in codices as a swirling motif emerging from a character's mouth or feet, signaling a call to sacred battle. The fusion of these contradictory forces conveyed the dual nature of life and destruction inherent in the Mexica worldview. The later addition of the serpent can be interpreted as a colonial adaptation, possibly intended to echo European heraldic traditions or to imbue the image with more dramatic visual appeal. Over time, this adaptation was embraced by Mexican nationalism, eventually becoming enshrined in the modern flag. But this evolution shows how history, legend, and artistic license intertwine. What we now take for granted as an ancient emblem may be, in truth, a composite of centuries of reinterpretation. The transformation from abstract cosmological symbolism to a tangible animal jewel encapsulates how myth adapts to serve the needs of changing eras, especially in constructing a cohesive national identity. Turning our attention back to Aztlan, the fabled origin point of the Mexica, we're faced with an enigma wrapped in layers of contradictory descriptions. The Tierra de la Peregrinación portrays Aztlan as an island with a grand temple, likely dedicated to Mixcoatl, the god of storms, war, and the hunt, surrounded by 6 calpulli. Some post-conquest codices describe Aztlan as a kind of paradise or Eden, a utopia free from disease and death. Others, like the Codex Orbin, paint a bleaker picture. Aztlan was ruled by a tyrannical elite that enslaved its own people. Most versions agree on one point: it was an island city, often marked by a twisted mountain and mysterious caves. Yet the inconsistencies in location, appearance, and social conditions have led many scholars to question whether Aztlan ever existed at all. Some suggest it was a symbolic construct rather than a geographical one, perhaps an allegory for the Mexica's own identity and evolution. In this light, Aztlan might not be a place to find on a map, but a foundational myth used to legitimize the Mexica's authority and divine mandate. As a result, the question, did the Aztecs really exist, becomes less about historical fact and more about the fluid boundary between mythology and memory. Interestingly, the Chronica Mexicayotl includes a passage that seems to anchor Aztlan in the real world, It reads, "Thus came the ancient Aztecs, Mexica, and Chichimeca from Aztlan, from where it is now called New Mexico." This mention of New Mexico has fueled theories that the Mexica originated in the north, possibly from regions within what is now the southwestern United States. The term Chichimeca itself was not an ethnic designation, but a generic label used by central and southern Nahua peoples to describe northern groups they considered barbaric or uncivilized, similar to how the Greeks once used the word barbarian. When the Spanish arrived, they adopted this term and applied it broadly to northern semi-nomadic tribes like the Pames, Guamares, Zacatecos, and Guachichiles. This association with the Chichimeca, along with the migration patterns detailed in various codices, suggests that the Mexica may have been northern nomads who entered the Valley of Mexico long before they rose to power. If true, their tale of divine origin and noble exile might have served to elevate their status among more established Mesoamerican civilizations, transforming a humble past into a grand narrative of perseverance and sacred destiny. Among those convinced that Aztlan was a real place, some researchers in the 1960s proposed that it could be Mexicaltitan, a small island town located in the Mexican state of Nayarit. The town's circular layout and position in a lagoon bear a superficial resemblance to artistic depictions of Tenochtitlan, such as those found in the 1524 Letters to Charles V by Hernán Cortés, published in Nuremberg. However, no archaeological or historical evidence supports a definitive link between Mexicaltitan and the mythical Aztlan. This hasn't stopped others from speculating. Was Tenochtitlan modeled after the memory of Aztlan? Or was Aztlan itself a symbolic reconstruction inspired by the grandeur of Tenochtitlan after the fact? The prevailing theory among modern historians leans toward the latter. Aztlan, they argue, might never have existed physically. Rather, it was imagined as a foundational myth to give coherence and sanctity to the Mexica origin story. In this way, Aztlan serves not just as a supposed geographic point of departure, but as a mythic cornerstone for a powerful civilization that needed to assert its legitimacy through divine selection and purposeful migration. But if the Mexica didn't come from Aztlan, then where did they actually originate? One hypothesis suggests they were simply nomadic Chichimecas, northern hunter-gatherers, who wandered into the Valley of Mexico and gradually settled near Lake Texcoco. As they grew in strength and influence, they may have crafted a narrative that transformed their humble beginnings into a tale of prophecy, struggle, and divine favor. This would align with practices seen across many cultures, where myths are used to provide legitimacy and rally communal identity. A more specific theory points to the reign of Itzcoatl, the fourth Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan, as the moment when this narrative was deliberately shaped. Around 1428, after freeing his people from the dominance of the Tepanecs of Azcapotzalco, Itzcoatl is believed to have ordered the rewriting of Mexica history. The aim was clear: construct a heroic origin story centered on chosen status and spiritual destiny. The German-born Mexicanist Hermann Bayer once argued that these stories, the founding of Tenochtitlan, the role of Tenoch, the guidance of Huitzilopochtli, hold as much historical truth as the Roman legend of Romulus and Remus. That is, they function more as cultural mythology than verifiable fact, designed to inspire and unite rather than record precise events. This reframing of Mexica history during Itzcoatl's reign wasn't merely a symbolic gesture, it was a strategic act of statecraft. By weaving a cohesive narrative of divine origin, heroic migration, and celestial approval, the Mexica elite legitimized their growing empire and reinforced their authority over both allies and subjects. The myth of Aztlan, the eagle on the cactus, and the identity shift from Aztecs to Mexica all served a larger purpose, to present themselves not just as conquerors, but as a people fulfilling a sacred destiny. It allowed them to claim superiority in a diverse and competitive Mesoamerican landscape, where other city-states also had long and storied pasts. As the Mexica absorbed other cultures and expanded their territory through war and diplomacy, this origin myth helped unify disparate groups under a single ideological banner. It's within this context that the phrase, "If the Aztecs were from Aztlan and Aztlan never existed, then perhaps the Aztecs never existed either," begins to resonate. It challenges us to question the blurry line between constructed identity and historical reality. The Mexica certainly existed, but the Aztecs, as the mythologized people of Aztlan, may be more of a cultural invention than a historical fact. In modern times, the legacy of the Aztecs, or rather the Mexica, continues to evolve, often entangled with contemporary politics and cultural identity. A fitting example is the recent renaming of the iconic Estadio Azteca. Once a proud symbol bearing the name of the ancient people, it was renamed Estadio Banorte after a sponsorship deal with a Mexican bank. However, during the 2026 FIFA World Cup, it will temporarily carry the name Estadio Ciudad de Mexico, as FIFA regulations prohibit commercial naming rights during the tournament. Yet no matter how many times its name changes, for most people it will always be the Estadio Azteca, a testament to how deeply ingrained the term is in public consciousness. This persistence shows that myths, even when they originate in historical ambiguity or political intention, often take on a life of their own. They become symbols that transcend their original context, shaping collective memory and national pride. So while historians may continue to debate the existence of Aztlan or the appropriateness of the term Aztec, the cultural weight it carries is undeniable. It serves as a bridge between a richly imagined past and a constantly reinterpreted present. And so, we come full circle to the original question. Did the Aztecs really exist? The answer depends on how we define exist. As a historical label, the term Aztec might be flawed, imprecise, or even inaccurate, but as a cultural construct, it has endured for centuries, shaping how millions perceive the roots of Mexican identity. The Mexica, undeniably real, carved a legacy that outlived their empire, their rulers, and even the language they spoke. Their achievements in architecture, astronomy, governance, and art remain woven into the fabric of modern Mexican culture. More importantly, their story is not just about conquest or loss, but about persistence. Despite centuries of colonization, forced assimilation, and cultural erasure, echoes of the Mexica still reverberate through traditions, language, and symbols. Whether in the feathers of a ceremonial headdress, the verses of a Nahuatl poem, or the lines of a codex preserved in a museum, their voice endures. In this way, the Aztecs may not exist as a strict historical group, but they absolutely live on as an idea, a symbol of cultural resilience and human endurance in the face of historical upheaval. Ultimately, what matters most is not the precise location of Aztlan or the etymological accuracy of Aztec, but what these stories mean to us today. They remind us that history is not merely a collection of dates and artifacts. It's also about the narratives we choose to preserve, challenge, and pass on. The Mexica built more than just a city in the middle of a lake. They constructed a civilization whose myths gave them purpose and unity. Even as empires fall and names are rewritten, the power of story remains. In every retelling, every debate about symbolism, every reinterpretation of ancient stone carvings, we see humanity's enduring quest to understand where we come from and what defines us. Perhaps this is the real gift the Aztecs left us, a reminder that identity is both inherited and constructed, rooted in memory and carried forward through the will to remember. Their tale of migration, reinvention, and spiritual calling teaches us that no matter how uncertain the origins, what we build from them can shape the world for generations. And in that sense, the Aztecs not only existed, they continue to exist within us.